The team I have my eyes on the most coming into the Paris home series is, in fact, the Florida Mutineers. And I realize that doesn't really come as much of a shock to most people, right? I mean, hey, they're the defending champions. They beat the Huntsmen, the Empire, and FaZe all in one event. They win their first event together after the change. Awakening looked absolutely fantastic in his first ever pro home series. Who wouldn't be looking at this team, right? The Florida Mutineers pulled off the most impressive victory that I have seen so far in the CDL, and that probably has a lot of legs for the remainder of the season. This very well could be, I'll say this, after the Toronto event, we very well are probably going to look back at this one and consider it at least top two, if not the most impressive win of the season. However, knowing all of that now leads to the question, can they do it again, right? Can they do the exact same thing or pull off the same, in some ways, upset? Now it's not really that same level, but can they do this over again? Can this team play at the same level, pull off the same impressive victories that we saw in Minnesota, be as solid as they were across multiple game modes versus the three best teams coming in to the last event? And I believe a lot of that is going to fall on the new guy's shoulders. I believe a lot of that is going to fall on Awakening. Again, let's not forget this team's track record so far this season, right? First event, second in Atlanta. Next event, top 6 in Los Angeles. The event after that, first in Dallas and top 8 in Florida, the event following it, right? This team has went from first place in Dallas to the worst performance that we have seen in an event this year. No other team besides the Florida Mutineers has gone 0-6 in maps, like I said, the way that they did at their own home series. And then from there, Florida goes on to have the most impressive win of the season here most recently in Minnesota, which they do add Awakening, but you still get my point, right? The core majority of this team at the start of the season was labeled as inconsistent, and their results do stand for that, right? While the results have been at the lowest of lows, they have also been at the highest of highs. And I do believe that this team has clearly made some huge strides since then. But I believe a lot of those top performances have come from their momentum gained in response, right? If this team wants to go back to back, they'll have to continue to add new elements to their game. I am a firm believer in that, right? If they want to truly be a team for the long haul, a team that can last for events to come, they're going to have to add new elements to their game, always changing something up, right? When we got a chance to hear from the Atlanta FaZe, as soon as they won their first event over in Atlanta, obviously, their own home series, they closed that one out. The interview after, Simp says, we realize everyone is looking at us, right? Everyone is now gunning for us. And the Florida team just took down what was previously considered the top 3 teams all in the same tournament. So now they have not just eyes, they have the best eyes now looking at them. Because like I said, they beat all 3 of them in the same event. They are going, these other teams, right? Atlanta, Chicago, FaZe, all these teams are going to come back stronger, right? All of them are going to progressively start to find out the faults in the Florida game plan. And I can spell it out for you pretty quickly. I can kind of point out what the main focus is going to be for teams like the Empire, for teams like the Huntsmen, FaZe. They're going to be looking at search and destroy versus the Mutineers, right? This is a team that if they start to struggle in respawns, talk about the Mutineers, if this is a team that starts to struggle in respawns, cannot always rely on search and destroy to save them, at least previously, right? Listen to this. Florida wins a series 88% of the time when they win a game 1 hard point. When Florida wins the game 3 domination, they close out a series 83% of the time. If Florida wins a game 1 and a game 3 domination in the same series, they win 86% of the time. Florida, however, also only wins a game 2 search and destroy 26% of the time. 3 out of those 5 wins, by the way, also have come from round 10 victories or higher. Also, 3 out of those 5 wins come from solely one event, that being the Dallas home series. So in two events, and the two events that Florida have won, I actually combined their game mode records from every series, that being the Dallas home series and most recently the Minnesota home series. In hardpoint, they had an overall 14-5 record, which equals out to 74%. In domination, they had a 7-2 record, which equals out to 78%. In search and destroy, they had a 6-6 record, which obviously equals out to 50%. But in those search and destroys, if you take the averages in terms of the rounds from when Florida won versus when their opponent won, you'll see that when Florida loses, they typically lose by only getting 2 rounds. So when Florida loses a search and destroy, the scoreline usually reads 6-2 in favor of their opponent. And when Florida wins a search and destroy, the scoreline usually records something that's a little bit closer. It happens to be a 6-4 win. Meaning in short, when Florida wins, it's close. When Florida loses, it typically is not. Listen, I'm not saying that Florida is a bad search and destroy team, but I don't believe that they are consistently a great search and destroy team. Don't get me wrong. In some of their series, in some of their victories, they have relied on S&D, and that has gotten them over the edge. But like we talked about, their record in general, their placements throughout the season have been here and they've been down here, right? You can't even see it with the camera. It's such highs and lows. And if they want to be a consistent threat, they will need to be able to rely on S&D at times, or at least often, right? Not only because other teams will start to learn their tendencies, but because of the way that Modern Warfare works, right? We all know this. Maps are closer in hardpoint and in domination, but just in general, in hardpoint, we have never seen such close hardpoints in a title before, at least from my memory, right? All the way back to Black Ops 2. I can't remember when hardpoints were consistently this close. In the most recent example that I can provide you with, when Florida lost horribly at their own home series, going 0-6 in total map count, the teams that they lost to were labeled as good respawn teams. Not great search and destroy teams, right? Teams that match up against them very well. Teams that know how to counter them, right? Rosters that they don't match up well against. They lost to the Rocker and to the Subliners. Rosters that, like I said, match up against them very well. Teams that are great in respawn, teams that typically aren't the best in search and destroy. And I know the Subliners can kind of go back and forth, but I like them in hardpoint a lot. They're considered one of the best hardpoint teams in the world. Their domination is something that they've worked on. Search and destroy is somewhat back and forth, but you get my point, right? And I realize that this team in Florida with Awakening is different, but you have to realize Awakening is only a certain player on this team, right? 80% of it is still the same. Right, that 0.77 KD that this team had at the most recent event in Minnesota can't consistently fly. I'm not saying that it can't fly. I'm saying that consistently it cannot fly. Now, I believe that they do have a great chance. When you look at the bracket that they've got for Paris, right? They've got the own team, rather the team that is going to be the home team in this event. They're going to have Paris, the Paris Legion in round 1, most likely Dallas in round 2, and will play either Paris, London in round 3 if they do lose to Dallas. Now, on the other side, I see a ton of different possibilities, right? And this is a discussion that we can have for hours on who we think they will face off against if they come out in either the number 1 or number 2 seed, right? You have a team in Toronto that's should be looking much better than they did in the most recent event in Minnesota. They're going to be playing with the addition of Kleenex, who, from what I heard, had a fantastic online scrimmage record with this team. Toronto is known as a great team in scrimmages, but they have reached new levels, for what I've been told, with this new guy in Kleenex, the guy that stole all of our hearts at Black Ops 4 Champs. Along with Toronto, you also have a solid and hungry-looking OGLA team, a roster that absolutely can be a wild card, and we know how talented this roster can be in certain game modes. Along with that, we also do have a continuously improving New York Subliners, and to top it all off, you've got the Atlanta FaZe, who, despite the second-place finish, looked very shaky in Minnesota, a roster that was a part of a number of different reverse sweeps, went to Game 5 constantly, and still yet, obviously, have a lot of questions around them. Now, I do think matchups will be very important for the Florida Mutineers specifically, and I believe that or I'll say this, I believe that they're going to be focusing on S&D, and that is what my main focus is as well, right? I'm going to be eyeing out search and destroy for this team the entire weekend to watch if they've made strides, to watch if they have improved. But let me say, if they can pull off back-to-back wins, it would be absolutely remarkable, right? They'll at some point maybe face off against the Dallas Empire more than twice, possibly Atlanta along with others. If they could win back-to-back while also being the first team to win 3 championships this season, while considering the other 2 teams that are in the top 3 with them right now in terms of power rankings, Empire and FaZe are there, it would be a remarkable feat, right? In my opinion, based on what the community chatter is going to be after this event, whoever wins between what is currently the top 3 teams by a lot of people out there, Dallas, FaZe, and Mutineers, whoever wins out of this technically should be considered the best team in the game, right? Unless it comes down to a game 5, round 11, in which one team has dominated the entire tournament and the other maybe has gone to constant game 5s, you kind of have a little bit of wiggle room there. But for the most part, as long as things go normal in terms of regular predictions and regular standings, regular results, the winner of this event should be considered the number 1 team in the game. And if that happens to the Mutineers, that would be a story. I'll tell you that. Now, in terms of what I'm expecting, right, in terms of my predictions, talking about can this team go back-to-back, I'm not thinking it will be the Mutineers. I really don't. I think when it comes down to this event, I am not expecting a Mutineers victory. I think that the last event, while they did look amazing, and I have given them the utmost respect and props for doing what they did, I'm not sure we can see that exact same level replicated, not only from their own doing, but because of other teams figuring them out. Other teams focusing on respawn video or on respawn vetoes, right? Now you have to also consider the same thing. The way the game plays. We've talked about this previously. Like I said, when it comes down to their game modes, teams are looking at them. Teams are now going to be targeting them for the future. Now, one thing that you also have to consider as well is also the short period between this event and the one that happened a week ago, right? We haven't yet had a back-to-back in the CDL, and that very much actually does help the Florida Mutineers out, right? It very much puts pressure on the teams to fix mistakes and to learn about other rosters ahead of Paris this weekend. Like I said, it would be crazy to not consider Florida as a contender based on what we saw this last weekend. Like I said, I've given them all the props in the world for that. But I still have my doubts, right? After they have won events, we saw not long ago, 80% of this team instantly went from the top to the worst result that we have seen yet in the CDL. The Florida Mutineers possess what was the most impressive victory of the CDL and also the most lackluster performance in the CDL. And those 2 results happened in back-to-back events for them. But based on what we know, based on what I have discussed, I think Search and Destroy does have the ability to be their downfall, right? If they cannot rely on the same respawns that they have had previously, if teams start to figure out their domination, figure out why this team went on, I think it was a 6-in-a-row streak in Hardpoint, those results aren't necessarily going to be there, right? Chicago Huntsmen, I think they went, 7-0 in the most recent event coming into Minnesota, yet had problems in what? Search and Destroy. Awakening is still learning with this team as well, which also could be the reason why they haven't looked as great in Search and Destroy. But still, I believe that this could be a real issue with the core of this team as it has been from the start. As much as I love the story about the Mutineers and find it incredibly interesting, if they could pull this off, I think other rosters, specifically Dallas and specifically FaZe, but Empire, probably more of the two, will be standing in their way.